please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
Well, the crack team at North Block is ready. The budget documents are printed and sealed. Come tomorrow, Finance Minister Arun Jaitley will present his fifth union budget and arguably the most pivotal budget for the Modi government in this term. Good evening and welcome to the CNBC TV18 special broadcast where we will focus on 6 important areas the budget is likely to focus on. That is going to be top of our attention over the next 60 minutes. Let's kick things off and straight to the most important sector, job creation. It has been a topic of heated debate in the recent days. The problem stems from the fact that India still does not have credible employment data. The Niti Aayog has just begun work on it. Nonetheless, where do we stand right now? Now, if you take a look at the data from the Centre for Monitoring Indian Economy, or CMI, it shows that the total labour force is on the decline. In fact, for the month of April 2016, CMI estimated that 439 million people are part of the workforce. This dropped to 425 million by the end of FY18. And CMI has argued that demonetization alone has cost 1.5 million jobs. By the end of December last year, we have about 426 million people in the workforce. But, and there's a big but, another study by SBI Chief Economist Soumyakanti Ghosh and the professor at IMM, Pulo Ghosh, has created a controversy. The report took data of new enrollments at the Employees Provident Fund Organization, that's the EPFO, and argued at nearly 37 lakh new accounts were opened between April to November of 2017. With this, they extrapolate that 55 lakh new jobs have been added annually. But this data has received flack from other academics and in fact even Congress politicians. Former Finance Minister P. Chidambaram said, and I quote, they should go further and compute the numbers for the UPA years as well. It is only a time series of data that will reveal the truth, unquote. Now, one sector outside of job creation, which is going to be crucial for getting more people into the workforce, is infrastructure, where growth remains elusive. Again, data from the CMI shows that new project announcements have fallen off a cliff from 18 lakh crore rupees worth of new projects in FY15 to a measly 4.2 lakh crores in projects in the first 9 months of FY18. That's not all. Stalled projects are rising steadily. In FY14, projects worth over 10 lakh crore rupees were stuck, and now that figure stands at over 13 lakh crore rupees. So what can we expect from the infrastructure sector and for job creation? Joining us now this evening, Mahesh Vyas, the Managing Director and CEO at the Centre for Monitoring Indian Economy. Mr. Vyas, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV18. Let me start by asking you in terms of infrastructure. Now, let's just take a look at the numbers. Capital expenditure, expected growth of about 6% to about 3 lakh crore rupees. That is the estimate for FY19. A 15% increase in both roads and highways and railways, along with a 10% increase in urban development and defense expenditure. That is the expectation. What is your sense?
So, there is shift happening on investments. So we seem to have got stuck on investments on 2 big fronts, which is power and manufacturing. So we have very low capacity utilization both in power and in manufacturing. And we now don't see much investments coming over there, and rightly so, because of low capacity utilization. But this is being partly, and not entirely, but partly offset with an increased investment in roads, transport sector at large. So there is some movement over there, but you cannot invest into roads and aviation and shipping and so on and so forth as much as we invested into power and manufacturing in the past. So there's a structural shift, but the aggregate is much lower. And I think that's the way it will remain for some time.
Okay, if you're saying that there is a structural shift in the manner in which investments are taking place away from sectors like power, etc., let me then ask you in terms of what the expectation is to boost private capex. My conversation with the Chief Economic Advisor, he very categorically suggested that, look, we already have a full policy agenda. There doesn't necessarily need to be anything specific outside of recapitalization as well as the NCLT process being fast-tracked. Do you believe that that is going to be enough? Because private capex capex continues to see a modest revival?
I think the only way one can make the private sector invest is to give them tax offs. I think that will be a bad idea, because if you have got low capacity utilization, you cannot, in any good economic sense, make the private sector invest into manufacturing sector, and the same goes for power sector as well. So the only window left for us is for the government to take on the responsibility of pumping money into the economy through infrastructure. The transport sector does require a lot of investments, and that can only be done by the public sector. So this will be A, counter-cyclical, and B, it will overcome this problem of trying to give tax offs that has not worked in the past, and I don't think we should try this now. We should not try, what I'm saying, to do something to motivate private sector specially. Build infrastructure, private sector will follow in due course.
Okay, so you're saying that the focus and the emphasis needs to continue to be on public spending. Don't try and force an uptick as far as private investment is concerned till demand starts to pick up and capacity is better utilized. Then let me ask you about what your expectations are on the job front. And I pointed out the data that that the CMI has put forward in terms of jobs, and we've seen the Ghosh and Ghosh report on jobs, as well as what the economic survey has to say in terms of formalization of jobs. Job creation is going to be, at least politically, in an election budget, a big talking point. What would your expectation be?
I think it's important not to politicize this problem. It's a serious problem. It requires everyone to put their heads together to try and solve the problem. So the Ghosh and Ghosh report, for example, seems to be politicized a bit. But I think this report by Ghosh and Ghosh is a very good initial attempt to try and put together data from the EPFO and understand what is happening to employment in the organized sector, in the sector where payrolls can be monitored. But even if you go by the economic survey, that accounts for only about 31% of total employment in the country. Or in the best case, which is a little stretched, it will be around 50%. What happens to the remaining 70% or 50%? For that, you require to do a household survey. So I think the EPFO data is partly being overhyped. It can tell us the relevant, the most important jobs, but it cannot tell you about jobs as a whole.
All right.
And jobs as a whole is best seen through a household survey, and CMI has been putting out this for the last 2 years. And what we have seen is that the labor participation rate is falling, and that is a stressful point. So if we had a labor participation rate of 47 to 48% in early 2016, we have something like 44 to 45% now. That's a lot of people having fallen off the labor markets. So the economy needs to pick up, and the onus is entirely on the fisc to invest a lot, to bring jobs back to people, to do something possibly even direct, like Manrega, to ensure that we do get jobs back on track. But let's not politicize this problem. It's a problem which is serious, which we need to address as a country as a whole.
I agree with you, and that is that hopefully should be the intention. But Mahesh Vyas, let me end then by asking you, what do you believe need to be the top 5 priorities that the finance minister ought to focus on? I'm not going to get you to second guess what the budget may or may not do. To your mind, the top 5 priorities that the finance minister must focus on to revive growth as well as achieve all the other objectives we've just talked about.
I can't think of 5 priorities. I don't think there can be 5 priorities. There should be just 1 or max 2. So I'll make 2. One is there's a need to increase aggregate demand. So I think it's important for the government to just spend a lot more. Central government expenditure as a percent of GDP has been falling over the last 20 years. It's perfectly fine if this ratio rises now. And I think that should be done with an objective of raising aggregate demand, which means it's not important where you spend it.
Even if that comes at the cost of the fiscal deficit target?
Absolutely. We should not be dogmatic about this. The problem is that we have had this fiscal discipline for too long, and that's coming at the cost of the economy having slowed down too much. So the first thing is raise aggregate demand. and don't worry about the efficiency of government expenditure. Just put money in the hands of people to get demand coming back, and the private sector will come out and invest then. The second focus should be on aggressive infrastructure building. And aggressive cannot be understated. So build airports, build more roads more aggressively, overbuild infrastructure. Why should we build infrastructure so sparingly? Why should roads be jammed all the time? Why can't we build much bigger roads, much bigger rail lines, and so on and so forth? So I have just 2 points.
So leave me with a number that
the budget is already made, but I would say I would want aggregate demand to.
Leave me with a number in terms of infrastructure spending. What's the number that you would like to see? Okay, you don't have a number. Okay.
No, I don't have a number. No, I don't have a number.
All right, Mahesh Vyas, we will leave it there and we will check in with you to see whether the Finance Minister delivers on the priorities that you just listed out for us, raise aggregate demand and boost infrastructure spending. That's Mahesh Vyas there of CMIE with his take for infrastructure as well as job creation. Another sector that's likely to be in the spotlight this budget is agriculture. There can be no argument that rural India is in distress. So how can the budget alleviate the pain? Before we discuss the measures that can be undertaken, here is why agriculture is so important for the economy. It is a sector that contributes 16% to India's GDP. This has been steadily declining over the last few years, but what's not declining is the employment it generates. This sector continues to provide livelihood to about 49% of the total workforce. Now, agriculture growth for this year is estimated to be just over 2%. Since 2012, growth has been fluctuating between 1.5% to about 4.9%. The Economic Survey points out that this large fluctuation is mainly because 50% of India's farm output is dependent on rainfall. The Economic Survey also comes with a dire warning that agriculture income could fall by a whopping 25% due to climate change in the medium term. As a prescription, the survey bats for replacing power and fertilizer subsidies with direct income support to farmers and also calls for a drastic expansion of irrigation facilities. Now, in this backdrop, the government's ambition to double farm income will face serious headwinds. To tackle the crisis, sources say the budget could announce a price deficiency payment mechanism. Basically, if the government's minimum support price for a particular item is below the current market price, then the farmer will be compensated with the difference. So essentially like a viability gap fund. The Madhya Pradesh state government has implemented this scheme after farmer protests in Mandsaur and adjoining areas. Can we see this scheme being announced nationally in the union budget? Joining us now to discuss what farmers want is the founder of the political party Swaraj India, Yogendra Yadav, has been focused on this issue. Yogendra, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV18. It is expected to be a farm-first budget, Yogendra. Now, what is that supposed to mean? Specifically, what is it that you would like from the Finance Minister for the agriculture sector? The distress, as we've clearly articulated, is palpable. The Chief Economic Advisor very categorically says that there is a need for a reorientation of policy. What is the intervention that you seek?
Absolutely, Shireen. We are looking at a very grim situation, arguably one of the grimmest situations for Indian agriculture. The Chief Economic Advisor has not only projected something about the medium range and the long run, the challenge of climate change and how it can, the income can shrink by as much as 25%. He's also said something about past and present. About the past, it's the first candid admission by the government that over the last 4 years, farmers' income have not increased. Stagnated is the word the Economic Survey uses. About the present, he gives 3 alarming signals. 1, rural wages have dipped. 2, sowing both in Kharif and Rabi is down. And despite that, farmers are not getting MSP. All this is official admission. So we are clearly in a very grim situation. What we need to do tomorrow, what I would look forward to is, of course, emphasis on agriculture. My worry, though, Shireen, is I know farmers will get a lot of very nice dialogues, maybe a bit of poetry, maybe a drop or 2 of tears as well. Will they get funds? That's my question. So I'm carrying a mark sheet for Mr. Arun Jaitley. There's no score as yet because we'll score when he presents the budget. All the farmers will get together and we'll score him on that. As you can see, there are 10 subjects on which we want to score him, 10 marks each. So adds up to 100. What's the focus here? Clearly, the focus is income. Income above all, as the chief economic advisor has said, that is the biggest challenge. So for income, I would look at two possibilities. One is a declaration about MSP, possible expansion of the government purchase. Increase in MSP, which the government had promised but never delivered. Also, possibly either a deficiency payment mechanism or strengthening of market intervention. We must notice, however, that the deficiency payment mechanism that you mentioned about Madhya Pradesh has completely failed. It's one of the most failed experiments.
Why do you say that, Yogendra?
It's failed because, number one, only 25% of the farmers registered. Number two, actually, the market was manipulated. And the only benefit that went was to the traders. This has officially been established by Professor Ashok Gulati and everyone.
Flaw?
No, it's a design problem. And that's why something needs to be done about it. At the moment, as Professor Ashok Gulati and Siraj Hussain have pointed out, this scheme has been a complete failure. So we should be very careful before implementing it. Good idea, very poorly designed, and probably not very good. So that's the income front. Of course, the credit front is the next thing I would look at. I would look at some kind of a one-time loan waiver. I know that's not very popular here. Or at least we would look at expansion of credit to those sections who do not get it. Some kind of a credit guarantee fund for small and marginal farmers who do not have money, who do not have land to offer. Thirdly, of course, irrigation. The budget needs to be at least doubled, including watershed, which desperately needs money. Fourth is, of course, about disaster and insurance, both of which need support. The Prime Minister's Fasal Bima Yojana, again, is a case of a huge disaster.
But if I just want to point out, because on the Fasal Yojana, while, and you yourself admitted that the economic survey is in fact a very candid and honest admission of what is wrong with the rural economy, but on the Fasal Yojana, it says that the Fasal Yojana has actually worked. That's the one area where they talk about, increasing the coverage, but they also talk about the fact that it seems to have delivered on the ground.
I'm not saying insurance is a bad idea. I think it's a good idea.
No,
I think it should be expanded. Just take the figures. The premium that has been paid is something around 22,000 crore rupees. And the benefits that the farmers have received is about 12,000 crore rupees. Now, it's clear that insurance companies need not make losses every year. It can be, they should make profit. But profits of this range are unusual and unheard of. And do we know that for some crops, the premium is as much as 30%, 40%, 58% premium for one crop in a district. This is not business. It's something else. It's a straight windfall thing that's happening. So Fasal Bima Yojana need not be trashed, need not be given away, but it has to be completely overhauled. The disaster payment mechanism, that has to be improved. That's another thing I would look at. And finally, I would look at adequate funds for Manrega. Which would cover at least the legal requirement of the government.
What is your expectation on Manrega? Because the allocation has already been hiked and the expectation is that it will further be hiked.
You know, what we don't realize is that Manrega is not an ordinary scheme of Government of India for which it can allot some money that it wants. It's a legal requirement. There is a projected budget that comes from states and districts. All you need to do is to multiply it by per day expenditure, which is about 215 rupees, and add the pending liabilities. If you do that, it works out to 80,000 crore rupees. That's not my desire. That's a legal requirement according to the law of the country, unless the law is changed. So that works out to a little less than 80,000 crore rupees. Okay,
so just as far as the Narega scheme, the MGNREGA scheme is concerned, as Yogendra was pointing out, it is a Guarantee Act. The expectation is that the government will allocate about 60,000 crore rupees in FY19 versus the 48,000 crore rupees that was allocated in FY18. That's last year's budget. Total rural spending, the expectation once again is it will amount to about 1.6 lakh crores. Share of rural spending has increased from sub 6% between FY14 to about 7.6% in FY18. So we have seen that go up, but it needs to be much more meaningful, is the point that Yogendra is making up. Yogendra, hold up that mark sheet once again for us, please, because that is what the Yogendra and his team tomorrow will join us on CNBC TV18.
And I'll bring a filled mark sheet
and a filled
with marks given there.
And a filled mark
promise
sheet.
to be fair.
Absolutely.
One should be fair to the finance minister.
We hope that you are. We will look forward to joining you again tomorrow. Time for us to take a break here on our CNBC TV18 special broadcast. But up next, we talk taxes with two of India's brightest tax experts, Sudhir Kapadia of EY and Dinesh Kanabar of Dhruva Advisors. Stay on with us. Well, if the union budget is about one thing and one thing only, it is taxes. In the run-up to the budget, CNBC TV18 conducted two extensive surveys, one with local circles and the other with KPMG. And here are the key findings. In a survey done between top corporate executives, 74% support additional measures on ultra-high income earners. So this is a strange situation where executives are saying, tax us, not our companies. This is basically those who earn more than 5 crore rupees per annum. Only 26% are against any such measures on the ultra-rich. But on the corporate tax front, a majority, that's nearly 55%, expect the government to cut the tax rate. Another 39% expect a status quo. Not just that, 80% of the CEOs expect personal income taxes to go down, with only 17% expecting income tax rates to remain unchanged. A majority, that's nearly 62% of CEOs, expect the minimum alternate tax or MAT to remain unchanged. Now, the next question, has the government's measures provided tax certainty? Only 13% of India Inc. say that the government measures have provided tax certainty. Over 49% of India Inc. say the government has a long way to go in providing tax certainty. But at the same time, when asked if the tax environment has improved in the last 1 year, a majority of nearly 68% CEOs said yes, 32% said no. Now, to a local circles poll conducted across 200 districts, 37% of the respondents polled said that they expect income tax slabs to be raised. 31% believe the exemption limit will be hiked to 3 lakh rupees per annum. 20% expect the peak tax rate to be reduced to 20%. That's a long list of asks and expectations. Joining us now to discuss what India Inc. and the common man expects from the finance minister on the tax front, Dinesh Kanabar, CEO of Dhruva Advisors, and Sudhir Kapadia, national tax leader at EY. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here on the show. Mr. Kapadia, let me start by asking you, sir, let me quote to you what V. Vaidyanathan of Capital First told me, and he said I can quote him, so let me freely do so. He saw the findings of our poll and he said, I don't know what these finance professionals and CEOs are smoking, because I don't believe that the government is going to do anything on the corporate tax front. Is that your expectation as well?
Well, one is expectation, one is what is in the budget. What is in the budget is already in the budget, in a manner of speaking. And we can keep discussing, wishes and expectations. Interestingly,
forget wishes, sir. Do you think that there will be a corporate tax rate cut?
No, actually, just let me articulate my views. Actually speaking, the roadmap of 25% has already found its place. Let's not forget, in previous two budgets, in a kind of constricted manner. So the only question is, will this now be the budget where the FM says, I have promised a roadmap, I am going to extend it to all companies, big and small. The statistics say that the 25% rate which was introduced last year for small companies up to 50 crore turnover extends to 96% of the corporation population. That's the statistic. But the reality is that the balance 4% who are left out actually contribute a lot more to the economy, whether it's turnover, whether it's employees, etc. So I think net, in my view, I think this is the budget in which the FM might want to be bolder than he has been as far as the rate cut is concerned. And my only point is, let's not look at it as a rate cut. I think when you look at it just as a cut, it becomes it creates a different connotation. The link between moderate corporate tax rate and investments is very critical. And can India be an island, as it were, when you have countries like US, etc., and China as well going down that route? So I would not be surprised if the roadmap is met with in this budget. Let me put it this way.
Okay, so Mr. Kapadia there believes that the finance minister could deliver on that promise that he made when he first came to office. And by the way, just for the benefit of our viewers, a 1% tax cut is likely to boost the FY19 earnings by between 1 to 1.5% if it does in fact go through. Dinesh Kanabar, let me come to you now, sir. In terms of the, the expectation year after year, whether it is MAT, dividend distribution tax, do you expect any changes on any of those fronts?
So just maybe spending a little bit of time on the earlier question as to whether there is a likelihood of a rate cut at all, because to some extent other things depend on the rate cut. So for example, you can't have a corporate rate tax of 25 and a MAT of 20. It becomes very, very incongruous. I think the ability of the finance minister to really give up this rate cut really depends on the conviction that if there is a reduction in the rate of tax, there's actually going to be a boosting of the economy and therefore a better compliance and therefore better collection. USA, as we had discussed sometime earlier in a different context, Shireen, has gone back to say that the reduction in the rate of tax will provide $1.3 trillion of deficit, but will be more than made up by enhanced economy. Now, the jury is still out there. We have seen what's happened with Apple, etc., etc. Does the finance minister likewise believe is going to be a key thing, really? And remember, this is possibly the last full budget before the election. So there's also going to be an overhang sitting out there, number one. Number two, a lot needs to be said about stability, Shireen. There have been a number of things which have been spoken about, whether there's a long-term capital gains tax in the offing. There was this mention about taxing the rich,
What is your take on that?
And if we are going to have...
What is your take on the long-term capital gains tax, Mr. Kanabar? Let me ask you that, because that is the number one apprehension that people have at this point in time. Do you believe that this is the budget where we could see the reintroduction of the LTCG, or will they perhaps tinker with the tenure of stock holding?
Yeah. If I think of it, 1 year as a tenure for a long-term capital gain looks a little bit incongruous, and there is no need to have multiple asset classes with differing rates. So there's no point in having 1 year, 2 years, 3 years really. There needs to be a comprehensive rate. I could of course put it the other way around to say that in the last 3 years we have had 2 changes in the tenure, but it does make logical sense to have a common tenure asset across asset classes, be it listed, unlisted, real estate, all of that. So I think that one thing which one would expect, and I think if it comes, I don't think it will be viewed very, very negatively. On the introduction of long-term capital gains, I think it's a more philosophical question. And the question really is, there is the government, which is a major participant on the stock exchange. So if you ask me, on equity basis, there is no reason why equity shareholders should be treated any differently from anybody else. Everybody is paying long-term capital gains, you to pay it. But you have a process which you put together. You put a process together where you have got securities transaction tax. You took that as an alternate measure. Are you going to change those measures only because at a particular point of time the stock exchange is going up? Then you are really tinkering, and what's going to happen next year or the year after if the stock market is down? Are you then going to say, oh, now there are no gains, but there are losses? There are people setting off gains and losses, so we now want to reintroduce STT. And then there is this whole issue of STT paid shares. When sales happen, how do you set off?
No, you make a valid point there, Mr. Kanabar, and let me put the same point to Mr. Kapadia. Leave aside the philosophical issue, Mr. Kapadia, but from a practical point of view, and let's talk about the argument primarily from a point of view of this government is betting on disinvestment. I mean, they're hoping that they will be able to up the disinvestment target to 1 lakh crores in FY19. In that context, and the fact that the STT has actually delivered 7,000 to 8,000 crores annually for the government without much pain, do you believe that this is going to be the budget where they will tinker with the LTCG?
See, that's an excellent point, Shireen, and something which has not been spoken about in debate so far in run-up to this budget. Nobody has really spoken about what could be the downside for the government if a rate of tax of, let's say, 5% even is introduced and it for any reason spooks the market. And I'm sure that will be a factor which government will consider. To put it differently, look at it this way from the FM's perspective. Is the introduction of a long-term capital gains tax, albeit at a moderate rate, going to add significantly to the revenue-raising measures of the for budget purposes? Yeah. If not, then what is it that you are achieving? You run the risk of writing down valuations of your own shares as a government, and then net, are you a gainer or a loser? So I think all data points, I agree, it's not a emotional or physical or a psychological discussion, but hard data does not seem to, and I have not seen any data which suggests there is a 1 lakh crore mobilization if you introduce a long-term capital gains tax. And on the point of holding period, I have always maintained, trying to motivate investment behavior through a tax provision, I don't think is a great idea. Whether people hold it for 1 year, 2 years, you should have a stable capital gains tax policy and leave the decisions on investments to individual investors.
Let me then ask both of you as far as personal income tax is concerned, because that is where we expect that the finance minister may in fact loosen the purse strings as opposed to on the corporate tax front. That's the expectation in order of priority. Mr. Kapadia, let me start by asking you, what's the expectation that you believe is realistic from a personal income tax point of view? Basic exemption limit being increased from 2.5 lakhs to 3 lakh rupees, a revision of slab, more relief for ATC and ATD. What would your expectations be on the personal income tax front?
So as you know, last year, for the first time in, I think, for a very long time, we have had a low 5% personal income tax rate up to 5 lakhs of income. I think that was a move which has been unsung for a long period of time. And the spike in personal tax collections, which you see amongst a variety of reasons, is also an incentive for individuals to not worry too much about coming into the tax net, because you can't get better than 5%. So I think that has been addressed. To your point, from 2.5 to 3 lakhs, in principle, nobody can quarrel about the need for it with whatever indexation of inflation. The one thing which, in my experience with tax policy administrators, what they worry about is the more people get out of the radar, so as it were, the more difficult it becomes in terms of audit trail and analytics for the government. Right. So I think they would prefer elongating the slabs at lower rates rather than, just increasing the threshold appreciably. That's my sense. Certainly nowhere more than 3 lakhs is can be expected. I don't think that would work. Up to 3 lakhs
can be expected.
Maybe. Yeah.
All right. Dinesh Kanabar, I'll end with you. The 3 things that you would watch out for in Budget 2018.
So I think what I would look out really for is stability, stability, stability. I think we have seen a number of things which have happened over the last 1 year, GST, etc., etc. We are also aware that the government has constituted a committee to relook at direct tax laws and come up with a new direct tax code. As and when that committee comes up with a recommendation, one might need to relook at everything. I could talk of a number of things which one could watch out for. There are issues on digital taxation. There are issues on global evolution of how the BEPS should be implemented. But this is probably not the budget where one should tinker with a number of things. I would really look for stability and look to say that the government is sending out a strong signal to the businessmen that you've undergone a little bit of pain. I mean, I was watching the chief economic advisor talk about the fact as to how the economy is recovering from the after effects of GST and demonetization. And I would say that this is a time for stability more than anything else.
But Shireen, just one additional point. Sorry, Shireen, just to add to what Dinesh said.
Yes, sir, go ahead. Go ahead.
What we have probably not touched upon and what we can look out for is what the government does on dividend distribution tax. It has been spoken about quite a bit. I think the intent has always been not to continue, and India is the only major country with that kind of tax. The reason why I bring this up is because it does increase the effective corporate tax rate without giving any significant revenue enhancement for the government. So when investors look at corporate tax for India, they cannot ignore dividend distribution tax. Whereas for the government, it is a win-win because if that were not to be there, the corporate rate goes down without significantly impacting revenues, arguably, because it shifts to the shareholders, and you can, of course, give benefits up to a certain threshold. So I would also watch out for any tweak to the dividend distribution tax.
I might actually dissent with that view.
Okay.
I might actually quite not agree with that view, because while the dividend distribution tax will effectively reduce the corporate tax rate, but the government revenues will go down, because there's a lot of foreign investment.
Okay.
When dividends are taxed in the hands of the shareholders, we have tax treaties. Sure, there is GAR, sure, there is limitation of benefit, but probably your collection of taxes might not be 20%. Personally, I do agree with a proposition that when dividend distribution tax was introduced, it was really because government was unable to control all the multiple millions of investors and really see whether credits were right or not. Today, with technology, that is no longer the case. But there is a need for a proper analysis as to whether if dividend distribution tax is removed, the effective collections will go down or not.
Okay, on that note, we have Dinesh Kanabar and Sudhir Kapadia split on the issue of dividend distribution tax. Gentlemen, we'll get you back tomorrow after the finance minister delivers his speech to see which way he has decided to in fact vote. But thanks very much for joining us. Coming up next, we take a look at what is India's export sector seeking from the finance minister. Ajay Sahai of the Exporters Federation joins us on the Big Budget Countdown. You are watching the Big Budget Countdown. Another sector that will be looking for relief in tomorrow's budget is the export sector. Now, here's why exports are important for the economy. The export sector accounts for about 19% of the country's GDP, according to the World Bank. Moreover, the Economic Survey has marked out this space as one with a big upside potential in the coming year. Since the rollout of the GST, the export sector has taken a big hit. We are seeing signs of a recovery in the last few months. Now, exporters are not happy with the delay in receiving GST refunds and the consequent working capital crunch. Sector-specific exporters have problems of their own. Take metal exports, for instance. Many are saying that the drawback incentives being slashed from 9.6% to 2% has made matters worse. Meanwhile, textile exporters say that export incentives have reduced while imports have gone up, causing textile SMEs to worry. What can the budget do to allay some of these concerns? Representatives of the export sector say they would like the finance minister to provide continued exemption on any inputs required for exports. For MSMEs, a comprehensive drawback scheme which refunds basic customs duty as well as input tax credit and direct tax benefits and exemptions for MSME exporters along the lines of exemptions for startups. Lastly, a scheme for capital subsidy for MSMEs to boost investment in technology. Joining us now to discuss the demands of the export sector, Ajay Sahai, Director General and CEO of the Federation of Indian Export Organizations. Mr. Sahai, thanks very much for joining us. The Chief Economic Advisor has made it very clear that the twin engines of growth for India need to be investments and the export sector. He hopes that the export sector will continue to see a robust revival because the global economy is seeing a revival at this point in time. How confident do you feel about India's exports today?
No, in fact, economic advisors rightly put it as the global trade, which has slowed down during 2012 to 2016, is now moving up. In 2017, we clocked more than 4% growth in global trade. Even in 2018, we are expected to grow by around 4.2%. The good news is that India has always been above the curve. In all those years when the global trade has done well, Indian export has done exceedingly well. So from that perspective, they are pinning their hopes on exports. And I think the focus of this government will be on job creation and providing remunerative return to the farmer. Both these objectives can be served if we can make our exports competitive. So we are looking from budget how to make Indian exports competitive. There are a couple of challenges also which are being faced by the export sector, particularly with regard to the appreciation
the exchange
of rupee,
rate, for instance.
increasing protectionism.
Yes.
Absolutely, exchange rate is a worry for export sector. The real effective exchange rate of rupee has appreciated by around 21% in last 4 years, which is a cause of concern. But I think exporter has to live with the market-driven exchange rate. There's not much which can be expected from the government. But other issues of the exporters, like the high cost of credit, which has been partly given through the interest equalization scheme, but the scheme is only confined to the merchandise manufacturer exporter. There are a lot of service exporters also and the merchant exporters who are supporting the cause of exports, and therefore this scheme needs to be expanded.
Okay. Mr. Sahai, since you spoke about the focus being on agriculture, what we are given to understand is that budget could also make some sort of an announcement as far as an agri-export policy is concerned. What are you hearing, and what is it that you believe the budget should do on that front?
No, in fact, the budget's objective should be to double the farmer income, particularly when the economic survey is talking about decline in farmers' income due to climatic change. And Commerce Minister has already announced about a stable agri policy, and I think some kind of budget support needs to be given for the agri-export policy, particularly with regard to backward and forward linkages in agriculture, on reefer van, on warehousing and cold storage. Some financial support needs to be given, and on some equipment which are required for agriculture sector, duty reduction through customs may happen.
Okay, very quickly, the top 2 demands that you have of the Finance Minister, and you hope that he will deliver on them in Budget 2018.
My first demand would be on the deductions which we are required for the export marketing. A lot of exporters are incurring huge cost in export marketing, and many countries are providing tax deduction for that, including some of the advanced countries. We want a similar facility for the exporter. And on the indirect tax front, we are looking into some kind of compensation of the embedded taxes, of the taxes which are outside the GST net, like petroleum or the electricity duty, as well as those which are coming because the end product is exempted, and therefore the incidence of input tax has to be borne on the product, which is something which economic survey has also highlighted. There has been proposal which has been made, and we expect that some kind of announcement may come in the budget.
All right, Mr. Sahai, we wish you the very best of luck. Thanks very much for joining us here on the Big Budget Countdown. Time now for us to slip into another break. Up next, what does Dalal Street want from Finance Minister Arun Jaitley? We tell you what the markets want when we return. Well, just hours to go before the union budget. What does Dalal Street want from Finance Minister Jaitley? Before we get to that, here's how the markets have fared since the last budget. It's safe to say it has been a party for the bulls. The Nifty and the Sensex are up about 30%. The outperformers were clearly the mid-caps, which rose 35% since the previous budget, and banks, which are up almost 40%. But there is a 5-letter word which hangs like a sword over investors: long-term capital gains tax. According to the CNBC TV18 and KPMG pre-budget poll, 62% of India Inc. say long-term capital gains tax on equities is the biggest apprehension. Joining us now to discuss the market expectations, Nilesh Shah, Managing Director at Kotak Mahindra AMC. Nilesh, appreciate you joining us. Outside of those 5 letters, Nilesh, what is the market going to be watching out for?
Market expects Finance Minister to achieve trinity of impossible. Market wants Finance Minister to cut tax at the bottom of pyramid to support consumption growth. It also wants Finance Minister to raise revenue by monetizing government assets through innovative means. And at the same time, market also wants Finance Minister to spend money to boost capital expenditure and the investment cycle, which is a little bit on the back foot. And after all these things, market also expects Finance Minister to honor the path of fiscal prudence. Effectively, trinity of impossible: raise revenue, spend money, and maintain fiscal deficit.
Well, the trinity of impossible, as you point out, Nilesh, and that's a great way of putting it. But what is the realistic expectation then from Mr. Jaitley?
Essentially, a no-harm budget. Clearly, there is green shoot visible in the economy. The quarterly results for December 17 quarters have started coming better, albeit little bit due to base effect, but there is green shoot visible. So essentially now market expects this momentum to build, and budget should enhance this momentum rather than disrupt it.
Okay. So if there is no LTCG reintroduction, Nilesh, but at the same time there is no cut in the corporate tax rate, but perhaps some effort to provide relief to the salaried class by way of personal income tax, how would the market then take that move?
So essentially, reduction in corporate tax rate is also linked with rationalization of various exemptions. So if there is no rationalization and then there is no cut, it's fine. But if there is a rationalization or withdrawal of exemption and then there is no rate cut, that is probably going to disappoint the market. The more important thing for market will be, one, how the investment cycle gets revived. And clearly, private investment today is little bit on the back foot. And with rising oil prices, even governments, hands are going to be little bit tight. And the second, will we honor the path of fiscal prudence? This is what differentiated India vis-a-vis South Africa or Brazil in 2014. And these two things are very, very critical.
So what is the number on the fiscal deficit that will worry the market, Nilesh? At this point in time, most people seem to be factoring in for FY19 about 3.2%, which is a slippage over 3%, which was the stated objective. What is the number that would start to worry the market?
So more than the number, what will be critical is how have we arrived at the number? Are we postponing expenditure or recognizing income in advance or ahead of what we believe is normal growth rate? So by, massaging numbers, if we achieve 3%, I think that will have more harm than presenting a realistic number and achieving 3.2.
Right.
So more than the number, it's the manner in which that number is achieved. I think that will differentiate the market.
Yeah. All right, credible accounting is what the market will watch out for. It won't be fixated on a number. Nilesh, Managing Director at Kotak Mahindra AMC, appreciate you joining us with a quick take on what the market wants from Finance Minister Arun Jaitley, a trinity of the impossible. I think that's a perfect note to end this CNBC TV18 pre-budget special. Do remember to tune into CNBC TV18 tomorrow to get real-time, incisive analysis of the budget with the best budget experts. This has been your budget headquarters for 17 years, and it hopefully will continue. So do tune in bright and early, 7 a.m. That's when we will kickstart our budget coverage. See you tomorrow.